and the game-changing ideas that will expedite our transformation. These interviews have been designed to allow you, ACS members, and our viewers to submit questions and have your answered by our experts. Please send your questions through Twitter, Facebook Live, or YouTube using the hashtag ACS Live. Our special guest tonight is Richard White, CEO and founder of WiseTech Global. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Firstly, congratulations, Richard. WiseTech Global share price has more than tripled in the 18 months since listing on the ASX in April 2016. Can you share with us how your journey began, please?
Yes, like all overnight successes, we were started a long time ago, decades ago, and have spent a lot of time getting to this place. I started the business in 1994, and I and my chief architect, Brett, wrote an original system that sold very well in Australia, but we were limited to the Australian borders because we could only, at that time, envisage an Australian business. By the time we got to 2000, we realised that there was a world outside and we could actually capture that world. We were strong enough and we spent enough time working through that to build a global system, which we released in 2004. And that was extremely successful. It got us to go into the US. We bought a small company in Chicago, and we opened up organically in Europe and started selling globally. That was very successful. We got through the global financial crisis incredibly well. We grew very rapidly whilst other companies seemed to shrivel. Our model seems to work well both in times of great difficulty and times of economic growth. And so by about 2012, we were really starting to think about what the world would look like with highly productive software, and we started building our Gen 3 systems. And we also started planning to list on the Australian Securities Exchange, which we did in 2016.
Richard, you and I both sat on the UTS advisory for many years, so I've known you for some time.
Indeed.
And I could see the track and the changes in your journey over that time. What were the key motivations for floating the company last year?
There were three, and they were very clear. The first one was we were becoming a global brand, but we were still perceived as a smaller Australian company. And we wanted to rectify that by giving the company that sort of transparency, trust and brand value that a listed Australian public company has. We were very convinced we wanted to do it in Australia, but we wanted that brand value, that transparency, that trust. The second reason was we had been acquiring a number of these small targeted acquisitions that we do, and we needed capital to do that, to grow the company faster. And so we raised an amount of money, about 125 million, to do that. And then finally, and probably the most important for me, was I wanted to give the staff, the very hard-working staff that had worked with me for many years, who we'd been giving shares to and who had a tremendous faith in the company and the work that they'd done, we wanted to give them a valuation mechanism and a liquidity mechanism for their shares.
That's excellent. And what are some of the recent acquisitions since floating the business, and how will this add value to your existing business?
Well, we've been very clear about acquisitions, and we receive lots of offers all over the world from investment banks about what they want us to buy, but we rarely touch those things. What we really do is we look to very specific things. There's two strategies. One is called foothold, and that is the idea that we need to enter very complex foreign language economies with a foothold in the country, with smart people that work for us and customers in the industry, so that we can understand that localized economy and become a true local player in these international economies. You've seen that because this year we've bought in Germany, in Italy, in Brazil and in Taiwan, and in the previous year we bought in South Africa and in China. That's a very particular strategy. It's a country entry strategy, and it's a de-risking strategy. They're quite small acquisitions in a relative sense. But then we also have this idea we need to build out the platform and make it much more rich and much more powerful. And in recent times, we bought a Netherlands company called Cargo Guide, and they are the world leader in air freight rates management. And we also bought another company out of North Carolina called Cargosphere, and they're a world leader in sea freight rates management. And bringing those two things together and combining that with our CargoWise One platform dramatically changes the way that the industry is able to work. It boosts productivity and boosts capability and boosts transparency and manageability, which make our platform as a whole much more valuable.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing that journey. The ASX 200 has 1.4% of companies in the IT space. Why do you think this is so? And what can we do about it to change this?
Well, first of all, that's an incredibly underweight position. That's factually, we've got a problem. Obviously, I've done something about it because I'm working really, really hard to build the value of technology companies generally, and particularly WiseTech Global. And I do spend an amount of time mentoring other CEO founders, particularly the sort of mid-sized founders that are trying to get to the next step. And, you know, I think everybody needs to recognise that Australia is underweight in technology, both in our education system, right back into primary school. We're not doing enough to educate technology. And right through business, we have this culture cringe where we don't believe that Australian technology companies can be world-class. In fact, what's happening is many of the Australian innovators are world-class and are being dragged overseas by the need to fund or the need to grow their marketplace, and that we lose them to the world economy.
So in that regard, Richard, you have clients now in more than over 100 countries.
Yes.
How does customer loyalty mean to you, and how do you go about building this in a globalized marketplace?
Well, I'm an engineer, and so I look for cause and effect. And cause and effect thinking, we look at customer loyalty probably very differently to other companies. We think that the best way to have loyal customers isn't to try to overservice them or to have great relationships with them. They're important things to have, but they're not really going to create customer loyalty. We believe that by having the very best product in the world, bar nobody, and having that product really incredibly productive so that it revolutionises the internal workings of the customers that we give the product to, that creates customer loyalty. It's impossible to leave a platform that is the best in the world and does dramatically more than anybody else, creates the values, the real productivity, the real capabilities that our customers need in industry.
And it seems that you've done a great job with your customer loyalty, because your share price has tripled in the last year since listing. So given your global customer base now, how would you describe Australia's digital maturity?
Let me just hark back to that customer loyalty issue, because it sort of feeds into this. So we have a customer attrition rate on a net basis, that's customer to customer, on less than 1% per annum, and that's a constructed, engineered outcome. We spent a lot of time building that. The thing is that we tend to want to copy a different model. We tend to want to rush off to San Francisco and, you know, open up there, and it really is quite tough to do that. But if you live in an economy like Australia, you can actually build something of great value. Now, what should we do about this? How should we make more of the ASX 200? Well, I think the ASX themselves are doing some good work in trying to attract technology companies, but we do have this middle market that we seem to fail at. We seem to get the good startups working, we get the smaller companies going, and then they get vacuumed up overseas. And you know, I just recently met a chap whose company Smartward. This is Matt Darling. He's a great technologist, a fantastic guy, and he's getting enormous accolades from hospital systems overseas and from global software giants with his technology, but he can't get an Australian hospital to use it. That's incredibly, we have this culture cringe here. It's wrong, because we actually have some of the best technology in the world.
So in that regard, Richard, so how do we get our Australian organisation then with that to stand out, to achieve and great things using that technology, not just internationally, but as you say, having a fair go in the Australian context?
I don't exactly know the answer to this, because, you know, I spend all of my time running my business and trying to make it grow fast, and so I really do understand when other people tell me their problems, but I don't really understand it in the detail that they do. But I do think that we do have this tendency to want to choose, and this is particularly as government and certainly large private and large public, there's a tendency to choose the less risky choice, to choose something overseas and big. And actually, I think that's an enormous risk to the Australian economy, because if you don't choose to innovate in Australia, the risk to Australia is so much larger than choosing a short-term, low-risk strategy. We deserve to give our founders, our innovators, and our technology companies not just a fair go. We need to put them ahead of other things, such as this modest reduction in risk, or this modest feeling of safety from executives who choose the safe option, not the best option.
Thanks, Richard, for that insight. We'll go for a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to ask Richard a few questions that have been submitted through Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube using hashtag ACS Live. If you haven't yet submitted your questions, take advantage of the break to do so. We'll be back in a moment. Thank you.
You have to embrace technology. It's going to empower you, and technology will empower the ideas that will change the world.
The biggest thing that's going to set apart those who will benefit most from technology is curiosity.
The job that they're going to be doing in 10 or 15 years' time doesn't exist right now.
It's pretty much, if you can imagine it, you can make that job happen.
There's a lot of scope for you to be bold, to push forward, to be brave.
Welcome back to ACS Industry Insights with Richard White. Thank you for submitting your questions. We asked Richard a couple that we have taken from our audience. We have a question from James watching on YouTube. Who do you see as driving the innovation agenda in Australia at this time, Richard? And what more can we do to drive it along?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can rely upon government or stand waiting for government to do something. I think actions speak far louder than words, and I'm yet to see, particularly in the mid-market and the more capable companies that can actually grow to global dominance, I'm yet to see real actions around those companies. A lot of good work around startups, but startups don't make an economy. Startups make the start of something. But the real answer here is that the only people that can actually create any real movement is the people out there, the people watching this video, the people working in innovation companies, working with technology. And you have to be confident enough that Australian companies can and will be global leaders, and you have to just put it out there and do it. I mean, Atlassian has done it, we've done it, there are many other companies that have done this. It's not new. I mean, we've got Cochlear, we've got ResMed, we've got some fantastic innovations in this country. We need to stop worrying about whether or not we're world class and get on with being world class.
I totally agree with you, Richard, and it's about having that courage and that conviction to go forward. Our next question is from Gavin from Chatswood. He asks, are there any Australian tech legends that you admire, Richard, and why?
Look, there are many people that I think I've drawn enormous insight from, and many of them are overseas and many of them are here. And in fact, I don't think we should model ourselves on just Australians or not on Australians or only on Australians. We should be thinking about who does great things and why. And ultimately, a lot of quite good CEOs network with each other and talk little ideas. I met with a friend of mine, Scott Frew, who's been around in technology for many years, and I was talking about helping him. And in that conversation, he just mentioned something, and I thought, that's a fantastic idea. Why didn't I think about that? And then I talked to Kath Phelan from Small World Social, and she's coming to me for advice, and something that she said went, I can use that. That's a great idea. The thing is that knowledge is completely free. It never gets stolen. You give it to people. It replicates itself, and you keep it yourself. So as long as we keep talking to each other and looking at what's going great, we can make a big difference. That's a really important thing. We are able to stand on the shoulders of the people that have come before us and project ourselves forward very admirably, and we can learn from each other along the way.
Thank you, Richard. And it sounds like collaboration is the go, networking, working together, sharing ideas. Our last question is from Amanpreet, who's asking, how and why are some of the best technology you're currently using, Richard?
What are the best technologies I'm currently using?
Yes.
So I think I'm not I don't have a particular religion in technology. I'm not an atheist. I'm prepared to use anything that works. There's lots of great technology. There's lots of great platforms, and it's really fit for purpose. A lot of people think I'm the Microsoft guy, and Microsoft does produce some good technology platforms, but at the end of the day, it's not the technology that makes things work. It's the people that use the technology that shape it into something that's valuable and productive and powerful. So really, if you're thinking about technology now, in 3 years' time, whatever you thought of is no longer up to date, and you've got to change your mind anyway. There's so much in the world of technology that's going on that it's really leverage, not strategy, that you're getting out of technology.
Thank you. Richard, this year I've been to San Francisco twice, and I'm sure you've been there many times. And recently you were quoted in the AFR saying that companies race to San Francisco only to find that it is the most competitive environment. And I've been there and I've seen how hard these people work there. And it's one of the hardest places to find talent because everybody is competing for the few talents around.
Right.
And what's your view, Richard, and your take that Australia is a great place to be? And could you tell us a little bit more, perhaps focus about where some of our talents would be and why we should focus more Australia rather than just Silicon Valley?
Look, Silicon Valley is a great place. And really for technology companies, software companies, it's actually San Francisco rather than Silicon Valley. But the dynamism of that is offset by this enormous war for talent. On the talent side, and then if you're offering a product, you're offering it amongst the very best in the world that are doing it every day with massive amounts of funding. If you don't have everything you need, that's going to be a problem for you. And I also think that running off the Silicon Valley is often driven by the need to raise capital, and that's driven by the ability to be self-funding. We were always self-funding, and I think many other companies have figured out a long time ago in Australia that it's safer to be self-funding than it is to be constantly raising capital. That's a kind of an Australian model. I think Atlassian has that sort of model. We certainly have been profitable for a long time and self-funding for a long time. But the real issue here is that Silicon Valley is a thing. It's not the answer to everything. It's a great place, but equally living in a very close-knit economy like Australia, where the law is good, where the culture is good, where the availability of people is better than San Francisco. The war for talent is not a low thing here. It's a big war for talent in Australia too, but it's certainly not like the war for talent in San Francisco itself. I think there's just benefits in not doing what everybody else does.
And Richard, I recently read in the latest report about startups that the talent pool is shifting from Silicon Valley actually to our doorsteps in Asia. We got all these pool and masses of new people coming into the profession. So there's a great potential to tap. And I'm just wondering whether we should look into our back door and our surrounds rather than going to Silicon Valley for talent. What's your perspective on that?
So I think there's several layers to this. The first is that we have to learn very quickly how to grow the talent here first and foremost. And we need to reach back into primary school, not in high school, in primary school, and get both girls and boys passionate about technology and engaged in being a technologist. That's the profession of the future. It's not going to be many of the things that we have today. They're going to be disintermediated by disruption and technology. So that's first. It's got to be building it here first. And then we can also encourage people from around the world, from Asia, from Europe, from America, from anywhere, that want to come to a wonderful, sunny, safe, well-run country where you can do things that in other countries people just dream of being able to do. You can do that here. This is a very attractive country to live in.
So are you saying that currently in Australia we have the right ecosystem now to start looking at ourselves rather than look elsewhere for those talents?
So I've obviously said that there are some problems with the ecosystem, particularly around the acceptance of mid-market companies that need, business with government, business with private and public companies. And that's a culture cringe that we need to fix. But the economy, the ecosystem at a cultural level, at a legal level, in a structural level is as good as or better than any other place. And you can easily attract very intelligent, very well-educated people to Australia. We've had a little bit of a problem with the 457 visa system, but I think that's easy enough to overcome as long as you're a real employer. And I think we can actually do better here. And I've often been asked, why did I decide to stay in Australia? Why did we hire the majority of our engineers here? And why did we list on the Australian Stock Exchange? And the answer is because I thought it was an advantage, not a disadvantage.
Like me, Richard, you quoted recently that you like to challenge things, and especially the culture aspect, the Australian culture, what works well in Australia, the innovation. Can you share with us, how do you build a business culture that delivers on engineering excellence?
Well, I think you do it one step at a time, because it's not like making a cake. It's very complex and it needs multiple iterations. We actually have an iterative culture. We spend a lot of time thinking about that culture, and we are not afraid to make changes when changes need to be made. It was a learning thing, and I started working quite aggressively on culture in about 2002. Once I realised that culture was actually the key strategy. But it's not just the culture. In fact, this idea that you challenge the status quo is quite important. I find it very odd that Australians talk about best practice, because it's an idea you're abrogating the ability for you to think cleverly and to do things differently and better. If everybody has a best practice, there's no point in getting up in the morning because it's all done already. But if you actually decide that there are differences that are better and that you can be different in order to be better, and that the only real solution to the world of competition is to choose to be different, not to choose to be the same, then suddenly you've got this incredibly creative path in front of you, but that you have to invent it, but that each one of those inventions can be iteratively built and can be changed and stopped and reformed if you wish. But that's a hell of a lot of fun compared with reading a book and then writing it out as a script.
And I totally agree with you, Richard. I think culture has a lot of basing to make a successful organization.
Sure.
And like you, driving the ACS with the culture, the change, the transformation, and it's about making a difference. So when we come back to Australia, you like to work with young people as well. So obviously there was a different culture with the young coming into the profession. You spend a lot of time in your work at UTS. I've been working with you on the advisory council for the last 6 years, and you also work with the ACS Foundation. Can you share with us some of that work that you've done over the last couple of years, please?
Well, let's start with the cause of that. I believe that there are two things that I'm trying to achieve. First is I'm very grateful for the value that this country has created for myself and my co-workers. And in doing that, in recognising that value, I need to give something back for that. Otherwise, it's take and not give. So wanting to be a part of something larger than just the company and giving back to the community, particularly to the high schools and universities, is a very powerful idea that drives me and makes me very passionate. But separately to that, I really do want to contribute to the Australian technology culture. I want to be able to explain to people that it's not that hard, that it can be successful, and that they can do it too. And so you have to be there you can't write that in a book and expect people to read it. You have to be out there on the stage talking to people at the ACS Big Day Inns, and you have to be granting scholarships. We provide quite a lot of scholarships now through both UTS and NSW, New South Wales University, and there are many more. I've got a whole team engaged with the entire university sector in New South Wales and now even Melbourne. But the thing is that it's really about both giving back and creating further advantage. We get a lot out of that. We get a lot back from doing that. It's not just in a feeling of good things. It's also we get people recognising that we're doing something a bit differently and a bit better, and they want to come and be part of it.
Excellent, and I can vouch for that. Recently, I was at an award ceremony, and you were in the next table with me, and you had a number of young women on the table, and you're actually promoting the underrepresentation of women in ICT. Digital Pulse that the Australian Computer Society published recently highlighted that only 28% of our ICT workers are women. Could you share a little bit more with the audience? What would you like to see occur in this area, Richard?
Now, a lot of technology companies get a bad rap for underemployment of female staff. We work extremely hard to get the balance right, and it's actually impossible because it's a supply side problem, and it stems from very early childhood, when the way a culture like any culture like ours starts to bias males to do certain things and females to do other things. I call this the trucks and dolls problem. By the time you're at high school, many females have decided that technology is not from them and they need to go and do something else. That's terribly, terribly unfortunate. And we all need to think about our internal hidden biases and the way that society and culture changes the way we shape females and we shape males. We have to have equity right back to the very first days of a child's experience. Trying to employ an uneven amount of females versus males in an IT company when the available talent is so skewed towards males, it's just impossible to fix. And it can't be done. So we're trying to fix the problem 20 years later than it should be fixed.
And I totally agree with you. Recently, ACS created a new committee, ICT Educators Committee, to help teachers teach better ICT in primary, secondary schools, and encourage more of the underrepresented groups, the young women, to actually embark on careers in IT. You've probably seen the ad that we have with the Litigal Empowering Australian Innovation around the country in recent times. But now moving to a different subject, given your work and the emerging technologies that we're encountering in relation to our own education system. How can we embrace some of these advances like AI, technology, and machine learning into our education practices and system?
That's a great question. And I look at the way education is done the world over, and I see, I really do see a huge problem. I see that, individual teachers make up their individual classroom plans and content. And I see that content is delivered largely through the teacher themselves. They have very little technology in the classroom that drives content to the students and allows the student to interact with in an electronic way. Teachers have to spend all of their time delivering content, and then a tiny sliver of that is meant to pick up the people falling behind and to assist the people that are out in front to help keep them interested. It's a real problem. We should have the base load of education delivered by self-paced learning, and the teacher there helping everybody deliver that self-paced learning and to get through with it. We need to embed jointly. We've got to have the teacher, they've got to have touch of the students. You can't have students trained just by computer. You lose all the human interaction part. But as long as the teacher presents empathetically to students and assists them, then technology can take a lot of the load off the teacher and deliver enormously more productive outcomes than we get today in classrooms.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Richard, for that insight. Our recent digital polls revealed that only about 4,000 graduates from university each year come into the workforce in ICT. So obviously there's a gap. And one of the recent controversy in the Australian landscape is how important is skill immigration to addressing the skill shortages and building that local talent through knowledge transfer?
Well, look, I think I said it before that we have to start with ourselves. We have to be able to build here first. I think it's important that we have skilled migration, and we actually get very highly talented, very sophisticated people in through 457 visa programs and other PR programs. And I don't for a minute think that those programs are disrupting the workforce in technology. I don't know about other industries, but in technology there's a desperate need for talent, and we should be, as technologists, we should be able to supplement local employment from overseas. But ultimately, it still comes back to we need to be able to build the talent here first, second and third. If we don't do that, none of this overseas supplementing will actually be that successful. And 4,000 kids into technology each year, that's a very small number. It's tiny compared with any other economy, and we really have a fundamental program. People talk about STEM and they talk about STEAM, you know, adding art to it. I don't agree with that, by the way. I think we should just have T, technology. Kids today, at the age of 4 or 5, are starting to play with iPhones and with tablets and with technology of the TV, and they're really quite technology savvy, and that resonates. The moment you start teaching maths and science to someone that doesn't want to learn maths and science, they will lose faith and they will start to check out. But if you teach technology, it will drag maths and science and engineering in. Really, technology is the catalyst for everything, and we need to build a society that understands that technology is so fundamental to the future.
Thank you. You probably know, as a member of ACS, that we have 24,000 members across Australia and internationally, and naturally that's a pull on ideas, and one of our new strategies is looking at how we can harness that expertise to help develop Australians' innovation, empowering ideas, and actually create thought leadership to help government, academia and civil society. What would be your view, Richard, that would have the greatest impact using our membership to actually drive this digital transformation in Australia?
Look, I can't tell you what everybody else should do. I can only really see this through the lens of my experience, and I'm an ACS member, as you know. I think engagement is the only thing that actually matters. If you get out there and start telling people what you think about this, and you get a chance to talk to parents at school functions, you get to talk to students at the ACS Big Day In, you offer scholarships to various universities where scholarships matter, you engage with universities, you engage with high schools, you even engage, as we did very recently, with the Junior Big Day In and the little solar buddy things that they give to energy poor countries, and teach the students in primary school about you know, what it is to have a social responsibility and what technology can do to help that. I think it's just about doing something. Just get out and do something. Figure what something is and do that something. You've got to put yourself into it, because you can't just make it with money. You have to do it with passion, with commitment, with your own influence. You've got to be able to talk to people and explain how it works and convince people that technology is a great career, because it certainly is a great career.
Thank you for that insight. And as a major employer, Richard, with CargoWise, what practical advice would you give to ACS members and people watching on this live stream on what they could do to develop their own personal skills and experience, whether they're looking to create their own business like you had, or looking to work with an employer like your company and looking to remain in Australian shores?
Well, you know, there's no one answer. Again, I can't give you a formula. I think I said something before about being different, on thinking differently, and that's a fundamentally great idea. You have to be passionate. You have to be prepared to be able to fail sometimes. You know, that failure is not a permanent state. Failure, as long as it's not fatal, jumping off a bridge is a big failure, but any other failure is not fatal, and you can move on and learn from that and improve. And as long as you're prepared to commit and prepared to push through those failures and realizing that failure is not fatal, you become very resilient, and you actually get a lot of what people call sweat equity. And you build this value in yourself and in the business, and you suddenly find that things get easier, and that what looked very hard is now very easy, and you can take the new challenge and the next challenge. It's all about personal motivation. You do have to educate yourself. I read extensively, and I love the idea of picking up new ideas from books as well. But again, it's not one thing. There's just a whole range of different things you have to do to be better. Just keep doing it.
Thank you, Richard, for showing that passion and sharing with us. We'll go for a very short break now, and when we return, we'll look to a few more audience questions. Remember to submit your questions through Twitter, Facebook, and your YouTube using hashtag ACS Live, and we'll see you very soon.
Our next generation are preparing for jobs that do not yet exist. The possibilities are breathtaking. Using technology, our children have the ability to solve the world's big problems. Think food security, population growth, climate change, cancer. Our vision is for Australia to be a world leader in technology talent, one where every child can fulfil their potential.
Welcome back to ACS Industry Insights with Richard White. Thank you for submitting your questions. We asked Richard some that we have taken from our audience. James has asked us a question through YouTube. Are you looking to expand your business, Richard, beyond the logistic industry?
This is a question that's been asked a few times by investors in private equity and other strategic people. And the answer is that at least for the foreseeable future, no. And the specific reason is that even though we have some innovations which are very broadly applicable, workflow, development application platforms and productivity tools that would apply anywhere, I think there is an enormous value in sticking to the knitting, on having a direct and absolute focus. And every morning when you wake up, you know why you're going to work and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And if you don't have that, if you're starting to think about, oh, there's 20 other things I could do today, suddenly everything becomes very vague and fuzzy, and you suddenly lose that strategic edge that you have. Sticking to the knitting is an enormously powerful idea. We do something incredibly well, and every day we're trying to do it better than we did it yesterday, and better tomorrow.
Thank you. Sally's watching on Facebook, Richard, and asks whether the conversation around government ICT procurement reform and bringing more small and medium business into the supply chain, has that changed the dial at all in recent times?
Well, it's not something I can talk about. I know from other CEOs that it's a really big issue, and that government tends to have probably more of the culture cringe that we talk about in Australia than actually private industry. And the risk aversion in government does tend to push people towards a large overseas technology provider rather than really elite, highly skilled and innovative Australian companies. And that's a big problem. We're not weighting the two things properly. We're underweighting the risk of an overseas company coming in, and we're overweighting the risk of a local vendor not doing it properly. And that's wrong, because if you add the impact on the economy of driving innovation and lifting the technology piece of our economy, the payback is hundreds of times the risk.
Thank you. Another question from our audience. Shize has asked what you think about the Internet of Things, IoT in Australia, Richard, and do you have any plans to explore this in your business?
So we already have a number of IoT devices around the trucking industry. We actually have a whole design team that does PCB design. We have a patent on worldwide patent on battery-saving technology. We have a robotic pick and place machine that builds the PCBs for us, a reflow oven, and a whole series of things we're doing around that. So it's actually quite advanced in WiseTech.
Excellent. The next question is perhaps kind of controversial, Richard. One of our Facebook audience, Shahada, is asking this question. Is sticking with copper for the NBN slowing down our progression, especially if you're working from an Australian based, and how's that NBN and the internet, how's that helping you with your global expansion?
Well, I don't think the NBN's had any impact on that I can perceive at this stage in Australia. I had a very strong negative reaction to the original NBN plan. I believe that government intruding into large technology platforms directly with all of the attendant bureaucracy will cause problems, and it has. I think Malcolm Turnbull tried very hard to fix that, but unfortunately the choices are quite limited, and we're now left with the inertia that was created in the first place. I don't know why it rolled out the way it did. I don't understand, if it was an economic model that I was pursuing, I would do it in complete reverse of the way that the NBN's been done. But unfortunately, the inertia of that system is so large now that probably nobody can fix it properly. And eventually we will get, maybe fibre to the curb. Maybe that'll be a way of fixing it. But unfortunately, when you look at other models like New Zealand is often quoted, it doesn't look very pretty.
So maybe you could say that politics have interfered with progression in this regard. Our next question, last week, Richard, I know you were overseas at that time, but one of our panels explored the concept of moonshots. And from a board perspective, and you are board CEO of your company. So what does innovation look like? And when do you balance R&D with return of investment expectation?
So I have a fantastic board and very smart people that understand the business very well. And that's actually one of the values of the company. We've spoken about innovation and risk on many occasions, and I have a very particular way of giving the board comfort and allowing them to see what's going on. We don't have one big moonshot. We have 50 running all the time, of which perhaps 5 or 10 come to fruition in a year. And if you have 50 projects and all of them have some fairly substantial value and 1 or 2 of them fail, it's no big thing. It's just the law of averages, right? Likewise with our acquisitions, they're quite small and targeted. And not that any of them have failed, but the point is that if you bet the whole farm on something, you have no choice but to get it done. And if it does fail, it is the whole farm and you're dead. But if you take this sort of cyclical, iterative, chunking approach to innovation and you do little things, and when you see it becoming good, you can then put a lot of energy behind it and make it something very big. That's a fantastic way of allowing innovation to flourish. Plant lots of seeds. Some of them will grow into oak trees and some of them won't.
Thank you. Richard, at the conclusion of my speech in last week, Reimagination, I shared with the audience about going on the yellow brick road on the journey, sometimes somewhere over the rainbow. And we'd like you to share with us your journey success that will be well documented, Richard. I enjoyed my time with you. And to the viewers watching and to those who have followed your story, what is the greatest piece of advice that you can give to our audience today and that you like to provide to people who are starting on that yellow brick road?
I talked about sticking to the knitting. That's an important concept. You've got to choose what your knitting is. And I've always also been quoted as saying that pivot is just another word for failure. But failure is not permanent. I think you can learn a lot from other people, and you should observe, you should read, you should think about how people are doing and why they're doing it. And sweat equity, the ability to keep pushing yourself by being self-funding, by taking calculated risks and by pushing through those risks, they're all very powerful ideas. I don't have a prescription. There's no right answer. There are lots of poor choices, there are no right answers. But if you keep doing it, you'll become quite good at it and you'll figure out where your future is. And then once you see that yellow brick road, you need to run down it really fast.
Thank you, Richard. Perhaps it's a bit like the lion needing that courage in The Wizard of Oz, getting on that journey. But ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for today. And I'd like to thank our members and our viewers for tuning in and submitting your questions. Thanks again to Richard for his time in the coming days. Visit the ACS website to view the full version of this interview. I'm ACS President Anthony Wong, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.